single confrontation can forever change the destiny of an entire civilization. Imagine a war capable of burying the Roman Republic once and for all and paving the way for a new regime that would shape the future of the West. In the relentless setting of the Battle of Tapso, Julius Caesar demonstrated how the might of the legions could annihilate any resistance, ushering in an era of empires and dynasties. Prepare to dive into a story of ambition, betrayal, and blood, where military power became the fatal card to dominate Rome. This conflict was not merely another duel between rival generals, but a decisive chapter that rewrote the political foundations of Rome. After consolidating his victory against Pompey, Caesar set out to crush the last republican voices that had taken refuge in Africa. In that region full of surprises, formidable enemies, and foreign kingdoms, the fate of Rome would finally be sealed. And as aristocratic senators united with allied armies, the power of the legions proved more threatening than any republican ideal. With each step Caesar took toward the African shores, the gravity of the threat looming over the Republic became clearer. In pursuit of him were kings like Juba the Throne and generals hungry for glory, forging desperate alliances to halt the advance of the future dictator. It was in this scenario of storms, ambushes, and bold strategies that Caesar made his mark, redrawing borders and silencing dissenting voices. But were the legions of Rome ready to face the unthinkable, against adversaries who ruled the desert and boasted war elephants? Prepare for an intense journey where each decision precipitated a turning point and each battle shook the foundations of the ancient world. Without revealing the outcome just yet, I invite you to reflect. How far would a leader be willing to go to consolidate absolute power? The answer may surprise you, and simultaneously explain why the Republic could not withstand the overwhelming force of a general hungry for conquest. Now let's unravel the events that transformed Caesar into the man who would decree the end of the old regime and the genesis of a new era. After the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC, where Pompey was defeated, many thought the conflict would come to an end. However, the faction of the Optimates, aristocratic senators who defended the Republic, refused to surrender. They fled to Africa, allying with powerful figures such as King Juba of Numidia, seeking to create an insurmountable stronghold. Caesar realized that if he wanted to extinguish the Republican flame once and for all, he would need to cross the Mediterranean and face this challenge. Did you know that control of Africa was vital to Rome long before the empire, due to its abundance of grains and wealth? This region, which would later become fundamental for succeeding empires and dynasties, had always attracted the greed of Roman leaders. Aware of its strategic importance, Caesar gathered 6 legions and set sail from Sicily in 47 BC, but faced violent storms. His vessels scattered, and upon reaching the African coast he had only 3,000 infantrymen and 150 cavalry. For the Republicans, this was the chance to corner Caesar and regain control of Rome, restoring the Senate as the supreme force. Metellus Scipio, leader of the Optimates, and Juba, motivated by the ambition to expand his domains, united their armies and resources against their common enemy. Meanwhile, Caesar, even in numerical inferiority, trusted in the discipline of his legions and their ability to improvise under pressure. The stage was set for a clash that would redefine the political and military future of the most influential city of the ancient world. At every moment the tension grew. Would the Republican honor survive Caesar's devastating attacks? It was a contest between senatorial tradition and the new order forming, upheld by bayonets, or rather, Roman swords. And at the same time, foreign kingdoms entered the game, proving that Roman conflicts extended beyond the very borders of the peninsula. But before discovering which side emerged victorious, it is crucial to understand how the early battles shaped the outcome of this bloody chapter. As soon as he landed on the African coast, Caesar faced a numerically superior enemy in a favorable position. Metellus Scipio and Juba had vast contingents of infantry and cavalry, and they were knowledgeable about the local terrain. Nevertheless, Caesar refused to retreat, knowing that each day of delay strengthened his opponent's morale. To protect himself, he adopted a tactic of constant movement, avoiding being encircled and buying time to gather his scattered men. In Ruspina on January 4th, 46 BC, the Optimates almost managed to corner Caesar and annihilate his forces. It was a critical moment, where the enemy ambush shook even Caesar's veteran troops. Did you know that ancient Roman war manuals praised discipline as a decisive factor for victory? Caesar's strategic retreat that day proved this. Even in disadvantage, the cohesion of the legions prevented total collapse. As the risk of disaster loomed over Caesar's forces, reinforcements began to arrive gradually from Sicily and other points. Each ship that docked brought new soldiers, provisions, and the hope of turning the tide against the enemy coalition. It is intriguing to note how this situation resembles future events in the Roman Empire, when generals awaited additional legions to face revolts in distant provinces. In turbulent periods, such as the crisis of the 3rd century, reinforcements made the difference between succumbing to chaos or maintaining control over vast territories. Now, under less pressure, Caesar began to plan a more organized offensive, ready to demonstrate the real strength of his legions. But how would he overcome the enormous disadvantages of cavalry and Juba Thurn's legendary African elephants? The answer would begin to emerge in his siege strategies and his search for a favorable position, which would soon turn against the city of Thapsus. And it is precisely in this theater of operations that unfolds one of the most emblematic sieges of the Civil War, the prelude to the fatal blow to the Republic. Thapsus was a crucial stronghold for the Republicans, protected both by its natural defenses and by Scipio's troops. Determined to stop the flow of supplies to his enemies, Caesar initiated a siege that combined a maritime blockade and defensive constructions. Have you ever wondered why Roman engineers were so feared and respected in later empires and dynasties? They erected walls and towers incredibly quickly, forming strongholds capable of withstanding attacks from much larger forces. Metellus Scipio's army boasted an impressive 90,000 soldiers, including war elephants and Numidian cavalry. Caesar, with about 60,000 men, understood that the exhaustion of his adversaries after long marches could be exploited. The Roman art of combining infantry, archers, and slingers in flexible formations allowed Caesar to choose the right moment to attack. The fortifications erected under the African sun were not just mere obstacles. They acted as a trap that undermined the enemy's morale day by day. As the Republicans attempted to break the siege, they suffered constant surprise attacks from the legions who mastered the art of harassment. Faced with the threat of running out of supplies, Scipio's situation worsened, forcing him to make a risky decision. Should he march against Caesar and break the siege all at once, or watch his troops wither slowly and inevitably? This dramatic choice explains why so many Roman generals in later times avoided direct confrontations until they were certain of victory. And what if Scipio had chosen to entrench and wait? Perhaps history would have taken a different turn and the Republic would find a last breath. But the urgency and political pressure from the aristocratic senators cried out for a quick and definitive victory. Caesar, on the other hand, maintained the patience of a strategist who had already weathered greater storms, ready to take advantage of the slightest enemy mistake. Thus, the course of the siege at Thapsus leads us to the fateful day that would enshrine Caesar's victory in the annals of Rome. On April 6, 46 BC, Scipio finally positioned his troops in battle formation, believing he had found the chance to break the siege. His infantry was organized into 3 large lines flanked by cavalry, with war elephants positioned in front to create an initial wave of terror. The idea was simple: use the mass of the pachyderms to break through Caesar's cohesive lines and sow panic. However, Caesar had a card up his sleeve that would change the entire course of the confrontation, exploiting the greatest weakness of these powerful creatures. Did you know that elephants, despite their immense strength, had vulnerable spots in areas such as their eyes and trunks? Aware of this, Caesar placed archers and slingers on the flanks, instructing them to shoot arrows and stones to blind and disorient the animals. The thunder of the legionary trumpets added to the fear, causing the elephants, in a panic, to retreat onto the very lines of the Republicans. Chaos erupted instantly, creating a brutal scene of tramplings and screams that would shake even the most experienced soldiers. Taking advantage of the disorder, Caesar's legions advanced steadily, breaking through enemy defenses and forcing a significant portion of Scipio's troops to flee. Upon witnessing the battlefield destroyed by the turmoil of the elephants, many Republican soldiers dropped their weapons and tried to escape. It was at this moment that Caesar's reputation for invincibility was established, as the victory at Thapsus left no doubts about his power. Not even the alliance between esteemed senators and the Numidian throne could withstand the blow dealt by the disciplined and relentless legions. The echo of this triumph would reverberate throughout Rome, for the Battle of Thapsus would mark a point of no return in the civil war. Still, the most shocking outcome was yet to come, a bloodbath that would demonstrate the troops' wrath and the end of tolerance for Republicans. It is said that on that day, Caesar glimpsed more than ever the absolute throne he so desired. But how would he deal with the prisoners, and what fate awaited the leaders of the final Republican resistance? Shortly after the victory, Caesar intended to show clemency to the captured adversaries, repeating his policy of forgiveness adopted in previous campaigns. However, the pent-up fury of the legionaries, exhausted from long campaigns and constant threat, exploded into revenge. It is estimated that around 10,000 prisoners were massacred, an episode that reveals how the atmosphere of civil war can turn even disciplined soldiers into executioners. In this act, the Republican ideal suffered its final blow, as many of its defenders were killed without a chance for redemption. The main leaders of the Optimates tried to flee, but Caesar's encirclement and the pursuit of his troops left few escape routes. Juba I and Petreius, realizing the irreversible defeat, are said to have sealed a suicide pact in a duel, preferring death to humiliation. Metellus Scipio also met his end while attempting to escape by sea, while Cato the Younger committed suicide in Utica. Did you know that Cato became a symbol of Stoicism, seen as a martyr of the Republican cause for refusing to live under Caesar's yoke? These tragic events illustrate how civil wars, especially in empires and dynasties throughout history, often end in extreme acts of violence. The feeling of betrayal and the desire for revenge surpass the limits of compassion, resulting in massacres that leave deep scars. Rome would be no exception. From now on, any new internal revolt would carry the shadows of this brutal confrontation. But what would happen when the army's use as an instrument of power was taken to extremes in a nascent imperial regime? This moment of collective fury shows how Caesar's final victory represented the symbolic death of the ancient republic. With almost all the heavyweight names of the Optimates eliminated, there was no political force left to halt the rise of a unified government. And if you think this pattern would end there, you are mistaken. The Roman Empire would see new episodes of usurpers and generals seeking power. To understand how the army would become the main tool of governance, we must look at the internal dynamics that shaped the politics of the imperial period. Since the civil wars, it became clear that the army was the key to power, surpassing traditional politics. Whoever controlled the legions could proclaim himself the leader of Rome, as Caesar demonstrated by crossing the Rubicon. This opened a dangerous precedent. The force of arms superseded debate in the Senate, establishing a logic of the strongest wins. Did you know that even in the empire, this logic would generate conflicts such as the Year of the Four Emperors in AD 69? Ambitious generals saw military strength as a direct path to the throne, compromising imperial unity. The crisis of the 3rd century, AD 235-284, took this dynamic to extremes, with dozens of emperors succeeding one another at a frenetic pace. Legions elected and deposed rulers, making Roman politics hostage to military whims. This instability eroded structures, forcing reforms that created distrust between senators and generals. But what would happen when external forces threatened Rome while generals contested the imperial title? In many cases, Germanic and Persian tribes encountered less resistance, as the army was occupied with internal disputes. The lesson history offers is clear. When military force becomes the sole currency of power, the stability of the state becomes vulnerable. Have you ever wondered how many kingdoms and nations have collapsed because their armies preferred to fight among themselves rather than contain a common enemy? Such a scenario directly recalls the Battle of Thapsus, where Caesar's army proved it could reshape Rome in the image of a single leader. In the empire, this pattern would only intensify, creating emperors who would rise or fall by the sword's edge. And that very sword, once an instrument of glory, would be responsible for sinking the Republic in its last gasp. Understanding this dynamic is crucial to comprehend why Africa, the stage of Caesar's decisive battle, would become a vital piece on the imperial chessboard. Caesar's victory in Africa was not only a military conquest but also a strategic step to control grain supply. Regions like Numidia and ancient Carthage offered agricultural wealth that would sustain the population of Rome for centuries. During the imperial period, any threat to the African supply route would generate crises of famine and political instability. Did you know that African provinces became so valued that emperors invested fortunes in infrastructure and local fortifications? Cities, like Leptis Magna, flourished, enriching merchants and filling Roman coffers with taxes and tributes. Thus, Africa became a true pillar for the maintenance of the empire, ensuring the loyalty of the legions stationed in the region. This dependence reinforced the tendency to fight fiercely for any territory that threatened the grain supply. Historical examples show that large empires and dynasties always protect their food sources as a top priority. The African influence was so great that after the Battle of Thapsus, Rome never underestimated the importance of this corner of the Mediterranean. Again, even in the following centuries, revolts or invasions from North Africa sent chills through the heart of the empire. A classic example occurred during Firmus's rebellion in the 4th century, when Emperor Valentinian I rushed to quell the crisis in the region. It is fascinating to realize that all of this has roots in Caesar's time, who quickly understood the power that this territory held over Rome. However, the conquest of Thapsus was merely the spark for a much larger change, the end of the Republic, and the consolidation of an autocratic regime. And what if the Republic had withstood on that African soil? Would the fate of the Western world have been different? The answer lies behind the scenes of an emerging power that would soon centralize all authority in the figure of an emperor. To understand how this occurred, it is essential to look at the moment when the Republic was effectively extinguished, opening the doors to a new era of supreme rulers. The Battle of Thapsus pulverized the last strongholds of Republican resistance, allowing Caesar to dominate Rome without checks and balances. Shortly thereafter, he would be appointed dictator for life, a title that consolidated his power but also fueled conspiracies. In 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated on the famous Ides of March, revealing that even absolute military victory did not guarantee his security. His heir, Octavian Augustus, would seize the power vacuum to establish the Principate, marking the beginning of the Roman Empire. Caesar's death did not represent the restoration of the Republic, but rather the catalyst for a new political configuration. Octavian skillfully manipulated the fears of the senators and the people, using the same tool Caesar had, the loyalty of the legions. Thus, government began to be centralized in the hands of one man, inaugurating an era of emperors who would shape the fate of Rome. Have you ever questioned what the world would look like if the Senate had managed to restore the ancient order? The truth is that Roman complexity no longer allowed for a simple return to the times when the Senate set the rules. Republican institutions were worn down by civil wars, corruption, and the ambitions of military leaders. By winning at Thapsus, Caesar proved that military power could overcome centuries of political traditions, paving the way for authoritarianism. Octavian merely completed this transition, consolidating a system that would persist until the fall of the Western Roman Empire in AD 476. Therefore, the victory at Thapsus was the penultimate step towards a disguised monarchy, which would be revealed in the titles of Emperor and Augustus. Without this triumph, it is possible that Rome would have fragmented into different factions, weakening its capacity for expansion. But history shows us that Octavian's unified power provided Rome with sufficient stability to flourish for 4 more centuries. The seed planted by Caesar in African soil germinated into a regime that would influence all future empires and dynasties. The Battle of Thapsus was not just a military clash, but the decisive blow against the ancient Roman Republic. By subjugating the last Republican defenders, Caesar paved the way for a new model of government, more centralized and autocratic. Even after his death, the seat of the empire flourished through Octavian Augustus, consolidating an era in which the legions determined the fate of Rome. But would Rome have become the colossal empire we know without this victory, or would it have fragmented into regional disputes? This final massacre symbolizes the brutality that would permeate Roman civil wars and highlights how the army would become the definitive tool of power. The events at Thapsus demonstrate that in times of crisis, troop loyalty outweighs any political tradition. Thus, the massacre of Rome was not an isolated episode but a signal that later empires and dynasties would repeat the pattern of ascent via military power. And you? What do you think about this turning point in ancient history that still echoes in our conceptions of government and authority? Share your reflections in the comments. If Caesar had lost at Thapsus, would the Republic have survived, or would another leader have emerged to claim absolute power? History challenges us to think about the fragility of institutions and the strength of individual ambitions. Comment on which part of this narrative impressed you the most and whether you believe Caesar's clemency was insufficient or impossible. After all, these questions bring us closer to a period when the quest for power consumed the very essence of Rome. If this journey through the Roman world captivated you, be sure to subscribe to the channel to follow more stories about conquests, betrayals, and epic battles. Click like to support our work and share this video with your friends and family who love to delve into antiquity. Your participation is what keeps the flame of knowledge alive, allowing more people to understand the legacy of Caesar and so many other leaders. Get ready for the upcoming narratives that will make you rethink everything you learned about empires and dynasties, because the Roman universe is infinite in intrigues and surprises.